Do you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
Hello, and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and in this particular episode, I'm going to talk about knowing your limits. In my own experience, one of the things that would happen when I would get into a new relationship is as if I would start this whole boundary sort of thing all over again. And it was sort of my way of having a new beginning and sort of seeing myself as kind of wanted to be seen with a new slate. Because, you know, when you come out of an old relationship, and one of the things that you find out the reason it ends is because there's something wrong with you. And I kind of didn't want to be the judgmental type, so I kind of wanted to start out with an open slate, or a clean slate, however you wanted to say. And in my own experience, what I didn't do early on, because I thought at the time this was not a very nice thing to do, but let me say what it is. In my own experience, what I did is I just started everything clean. I didn't really have boundaries. I didn't say I didn't want to be with a particular kind of person because of so-and-so. I mean, there were things that I wouldn't do. I wouldn't hang out with people that would steal or create a lot of drama in your life. I mean, that I knew ahead of time. That's not something I wanted to do. But for instance, if you smoked, and I'm not a smoker, I have nothing against people, but it is just not something I do. But I didn't necessarily say, okay, I didn't want to date him. I mean, at that point in time in my life, I was saying, hey, everything goes. But I think what I learned later on, and if you listen to podcast 65, one of the things I talked about was health. And at that time, I was going through life learning about these sort of things, learning to take that information in and realizing that it applies all the time. It's not just a one-shot thing. And that's something that we have to learn about our own lives. We learn how to learn. That when we have experiences, or when you have an experience in life, then you get to file it away and use that as information on what to do the next time. Now, life obviously gives us opportunities to know when to apply it and when not to. I think the problem happens is when we don't discriminate, when we don't make better decisions about when to apply certain advice. Because remember, that's what life is supposed to teach us, when to and when not to. And if you just blanket rule everything, that you had an experience once and decide that the rest of life, that's how it's going to be, then you wind up limiting yourself, I think, in a harmful way. Mostly to yourself. I mean, other people don't have to deal with you. They can find out early on you're not somebody to deal with. But I think you harm yourself because you're not open to other possibilities. So this was at least the perception of my wisdom. I didn't want to close myself off from other possibilities. But what I had to learn was that there are certain things I need to carry with me every time. And having those boundaries, which is something I've talked about from time to time, is what you need to learn in life. Now, this applies in relationships. It definitely applies, because you have to have boundaries in order to get anywhere. In order to be able to accomplish things, you got to set limits. Number one, just to know when you've accomplished something, but therein also so that your life does not get impacted by every single piece of drama that keeps taking you off your chosen path or your destiny. Things are going to constantly come into your life that are going to impact you in ways that you can't imagine. Some good, some not so good. But the part about life's experience that's going to give you an opportunity to see things, it's like the baseball player that sees that ball coming from the pitcher's hand. They can literally see the rotation on that ball, and it tells them a lot about how they're going to try to hit that pitch. I mean, talk to baseball players. It's an amazing gift. It's their mind's eye being able to perceive something, and they've done it so much, they learn from it, and they learn how to react to it. Baseball players talk about this next thing all the time. They talk about the high fastball and about how guys can't lay off of it because it just seems so fat, and they want to hit it. Well, a lot of guys strike out on that pitch because it's, number one, it's out of their zone to be able to swing it and hit it. And managers hate it because they watch a guy strike out because he didn't have the discipline to lay off of it. It's obviously out of the strike zone, so it's a ball, and you may be able to get on base with that. Anyway, that's a baseball analogy. Baseball people will know exactly what I'm talking about. Life does the same sort of thing. And I know I'm borrowing a sports metaphor, and I don't generally do that, but I think most of us can have some relationship to life from the standpoint of there are things that we should certainly learn to stay away from, and life will give you opportunities to learn what those things are. Because if you don't, then you get drawn into the consequence of making that choice. I do it, or I've done it. I'm sure that you've done it. But the important thing is to learn from it and to move on, knowing that if you don't learn from it, it's going to happen again. And one of those examples is when we tend to date somebody who is similar to the kind of person that has caused us heartbreak in the past, not being open to other possibilities. Now, again, I'm going to reach back to something that I had started this podcast with. Is I myself did not have a lot of boundaries in that regard, and I had to learn them later on because, again, I wanted to start with a clean slate. Now, having done that, I've certainly introduced myself to a lot of characters, a lot of fun, witty women who were, and the relationships were short-lived because eventually you find out, you know what, it didn't work out. And whether they left me or I ended the relationship, it doesn't matter. It just didn't work out. I got smarter later on because I started being more selective, and I certainly encourage you to be selective. But you got to do it because you think about it, and not just this impulsive thing that we tend to do because it just feels good. You got to get past that. Because you got to mature past that in order to make decisions. Because think about it. When you start dating someone who has more potential to be a lifetime partner, then there's a lot at stake. You want to have boundaries. You want to have things in place. You want to be able to talk about the important things in your life and then find out where they're at. Find out where your potential partner is. Because that's going to give you an insight as to what kind of planning. Now, to the guys that are listening, women like men that have a plan, that have an idea about what they want to do and how they want to get there. That, and why? It's because it shows stability. And if you're the kind of guy that is willing to ask the tough questions in advance, when I say tough questions, I'm talking about really the questions, where do you want this relationship? Or where are you going to be in 4 years, 5 years, 10 years? It's a thought. It's a very interesting conversational piece. And I have talked to women who generally they bring it up because women think about their life from the time they're little girls. Guys don't necessarily think about it in that aspect. They don't necessarily think about the relationship in their life. Guys may think about career. They may think about that they want to be a baseball player or a football player or an airline pilot or maybe join the military. But that's something that's in relationship to themselves. But when we talk about the aspect of being in relationship with someone else, see, that's a different mindset. But going back to the question about, what do you think about in terms of the long haul? And guys, if you want to impress a woman, have that conversation. Where do you see yourself in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Almost like you would if you were, having an interview for a job. They obviously ask the questions about what are your career goals, because they want to know if their company fits in with that, or if you're just going to use their company as a stepping stone. See, that's the kind of thing that women want to know. Are you just going to use me to get to the next girl? Because, guys, I would ask that question because there are a lot of women out there who are, quote unquote, social climbers. They see you as the next step to the guy that they want to be with. And if they're giving any inkling towards that, hey, you don't want to be somebody's stepping stone. God, that doesn't feel good. So think about that for a second. I'm going to take a quick commercial break, and I'm going to come back. I'll talk about a few more things. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and in this episode, I'm talking about knowing your limits. So, in this segment, I'm going to address something that I think is interesting to women. Women often ask, how come guys seem to avoid commitment? And I'm not one that believes that guys necessarily avoid commitment to not being in relationships with women. I think often guys have the fear that they're going to get themselves trapped into something that they can't explain, because when women ask guys questions, guys oftentimes go into the panic mode because they think that they're going to answer the question wrong and that they're going to be in trouble. This is just the guy's normal reaction. Now, guys that are a little more mature understand that there's a way that you can ask a question that you're going to get an answer, and it's all about clarity. But you have to admit, and I'm talking to the women, sometimes you ask questions in a way so that you can ambush the guy. And that's what a guy's fear is, that he's going to say something that's going to give you more ammunition to beat him down. So consider that. But I'm going to give you something else to think about, and it's what guys like, what they appreciate, and what really helps a guy feel invested or want to invest in a relationship is because here's something that all guys appreciate: being respected by the woman that they're involved with, or even by the women that are their friends. They appreciate that, because when I say respect, I mean is that they feel valued. You value their opinion, because everybody has an idea about something, and it doesn't mean that they have to go on and on and on talking about it in a dramatic fashion. But there are a lot of important things in life that can be discussed, whether it's finances, whether it's your opinion about kids, whether it's an opinion about how to handle a math problem or a difficult individual. These are adult conversations, and guys appreciate being asked their opinion, even if it's other guys. Because I can tell you, I know a lot of guys, and guys will call each other out on something. And given if a woman asks another guy about a particular behavior that guys are doing, I mean, you can kind of tell. I mean, some guys, I mean, there is the bro code. You know, we're not gonna move in on you. And, you know, it might be a little dicey to ask a guy about his friend if the guy is kind of but if you ask a neutral fella, somebody that has no vested interest in having a relationship with you, what he thinks of some other guy's behavior, I think a guy will come clean and he'll tell you. And guys appreciate that because guys will call each other out. So think about that. One of the other things is if you want to talk to a guy, if you talk about his virtues, something that you really appreciate about him, that, you know, whether he's strong or handsome, and these are the things that I want to mention here. And I think this is a good social thing to point out. Somebody who's really good at diffusing confrontation. I know we tend to value guys that, you know, they lift weights, they go to the gym, they look good, but it's not always about being Mr. Muscles. Sometimes it's about thinking and knowing how to diffuse a situation so that it doesn't become dramatic. Because we all deal with conflict differently. And I know that if I'm talking to someone, I don't necessarily want them to feel like I'm trying to bully them. Never. That's certainly totally opposite, because I wouldn't like feeling like I'm being bullied. I like being talked to. So I can tell when somebody is really working to make peace as opposed to making a confrontation. And if you are involved with somebody, or, you know, emphasize that those are the kind of things that are attractive to you, or somebody who has worked on his stuff. You know, women, if you happen to be interested in a guy, and, you know, we've all had relationship challenges, how we deal with those things is obviously an indication of how we're going to deal with conflict in the future. Some people get really good advice. Some people go to counselors. Some people read a really good book, and some people can tell you about, you know, the trouble that they created themselves. But I think what's neat about this is that they're trying to be transparent and share that. Appreciate that virtue, because there's a lot that you can do with somebody who's willing to be open and transparent. Now, there may be lots of questions that you may have that a person has not really had a chance to give deep thought to. And I would invite you to ask those kinds of questions. And if they don't have an answer, give them an opportunity to think about it, and you can get back. I mean, that might make for a very, very good conversation. And it's a really important intellectual place to start in a relationship, as opposed to just being attracted to someone because of their looks. I mean, granted, there is the chemistry part to this. I like it. I think it's great. But when you're also asking these other kinds of questions, you know, it sends a signal that you're genuinely interested in this person, that you're thinking about, wow, there's actual possibility. And people really appreciate that thought, because you're treating them like an adult. And also emphasize, and I think this is another important, especially in this day in life when we see instant news and the facts are missing and people are just always in reaction mode, or it seems pervasive, but about how people are calm in the face of such situations. That, I think, is a virtue, and that's the kind of person you want to be around, because in life there are going to be situations that you're going to have a definite reaction to. And I always like to use the example of people who are in stressful situations, but they handle them very calmly, just like a pro. And far be it for me, I don't have all the answers, but I have definitely watched people in stressful situations handle it smoothly, and I admire that. And that's what I shoot for. I mean, I've certainly had my opportunities to be that person, and I've handled it well, and I've received compliments for that. But by the same token, I look for other people that handle situations. And if I'm a guy who's interested in a woman, knowing that she handles things like the boss in a smooth, calm, rational manner, rather than making everything an emergency. So guys, as much as I've shared with women and things to look for, hey, turn this around and be just as thoughtful in the kinds of questions that you want to ask, because it's going to give you a lot of insight as to who you're around. Because there are a lot of things that people can mask, because when you don't ask the right kinds of questions, then the conversation doesn't necessarily come up. But when you ask the right kind of questions, then you can get something about their background, their history, how they problem solve. And it really elevates you, that you're not somebody who's just a simple mind, who's just going to take any and everything. So that's a conversation starter. And I think you can get a lot out of that. I'm going to take a break, and then I'm going to come right back. Stay tuned.
Always on the go, but the day just won't be one without your Hollywood fix. Let Golden State Media Concepts Entertainment Podcast take care of that. Jordan and Keith is Entertainment Tonight meets Access Hollywood.
I'm Jordan. The guy laughing, that's Keith.
Yeah, I'm Keith.
An all-inclusive look of pop culture.
Hello, and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. And I'm going to round out this segment by talking about therapy. That is, therapy in and of itself. I have mentioned it many times in my podcast, and as a way to help you bridge your difficulties. Because when we have problems, it's important, I think, that we find solutions to those that we can, and going to people that we trust. There's often a tendency to kind of ask our friends for advice, and that's not a bad thing. But one of the things that we run into by doing that is we may reintroduce ourselves to their bias. Friends, being the individuals they are, oftentimes don't have the perspective that may be necessary to help you get past a problem. And I think I, for one, can really appreciate the loyalty that friends bring to your situation or to a relationship. They're absolutely valuable, and life would definitely be difficult without them. But the problem with friendship is that when it comes to objectivity, sometimes they can't really give it. And I think one of the best pieces of advice a friend can give is to help you be mindful of the fact that sometimes as a friend, they have our own bias, and that maybe you should seek professional help. It, in and of itself, it gives you an opportunity to get a new perspective on a problem. And I'm going to mention that therapists come in all shapes and sizes. There's MFCCs, which is a marriage, family, and child counselor. You have MSWs, which are masters in social work. LCSWs, licensed clinical social workers. You have psychiatrists. You have psychologists. And the distinct difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist is a psychiatrist is basically a medical doctor, and they can prescribe medications. So there may certainly be a situation in your life where medication is a reasonable option. It may be something that helps you get through a situation, but just understand that there are differences. Now, the next part, choosing a therapist, can be a bit daunting, because when you're in crisis, oftentimes the urgency of the situation makes you want to choose someone, hopefully as soon as you reasonably can. But the important thing to remember in therapists is sometimes they are a good fit and sometimes they aren't. Now, that could be a very difficult choice to make when you are in crisis. I mean, are you able to actually have the best choices in judgment, especially when it comes to selecting professionals? And yeah, that may be a challenge. But what I encourage you to do is to be aware of how you feel. Do you feel safe? Do you feel that this person has a communication style that works for you? Some people like a therapist that's very direct. Some people like therapists that aren't so direct, that allow you the opportunity to kind of talk about your feelings and flush things out. Now, that is most certainly something you need to be able to do, is to express yourself. And often therapists may push you to share your feelings because it's really about getting you to have your own voice. And that's sometimes something that you need to be able to do in order to get past the problem, you see. And therapists are trained at helping you to get that, and also to helping you become independent. Because the idea isn't to create a situation in which you're dependent upon the therapist to think. A therapist really wants to help you get to a place where you can be independent. That's vitally important. And it's okay that you take those opportunities to ask the kinds of questions so that you can be independent. And you want that. You want that for yourself, because you can't spend your life being attached to someone else, because, hey, that may have been part of the problem in the first place. That made it difficult for you to leave a relationship. But that's for another time. But choosing a therapist is definitely consider someone who, like I said, you feel like you can have an open and honest conversation with. The idea is you can't get over your problem if you're hiding stuff related to the problem. It just doesn't work, because you're not going to be able to fool someone, and especially a therapist. They've seen these things. This is part of what their training is. It's to be able to see through some of these problems. And I think you want them to be on your side, but you don't serve yourself when you can't be honest. So here again, it's finding a therapist who you feel comfortable talking with. And you may find those, let's say you're dealing with something like grief. If there's been a death in the family, there are therapists who are definitely trained in dealing with grief and complicated grief. That's a whole different discipline. So look out for those kinds of things for yourself. Where do you find therapists? Well, you can do a computer search. Some communities still have phone books, and you can find them in the area of the phone book that lists therapists. And there are many of them. I've looked in phone books myself in different communities, and have been amazed at how many people take on that discipline. And there's a lot of work involved in becoming a licensed therapist. And I would encourage you to seek that assistance in being able to help change the things about you that you want to work on. They offer a lot of insight, and they want to help. That's why they're in the helping profession. And if you ever feel like something is not going well in your session, then I encourage you to speak up. And hopefully your therapist gives you that confidence to do that as well, which then gives you the confidence to speak up in life. These are all life's lessons, and it's, we get them when we get them. But just a word, I wanted to share that with you to give you some encouragement to do that. If you're in a rough place in life and you're trying to get to where you can find answers. In the past, I've mentioned things like finding a good book that may help give you some insight into your own problems, but I definitely encourage those who feel like therapy is a good option for them to seek out a therapist, again, someone that you can talk to, be open and honest with, and whether it's just a problem that you yourself are facing, or if you have a significant other, go to the therapy session with them, and they can give you tools, meaning knowledge on how to interact with each other and how to do things, and hopefully they can explain things to you in a way that resonates with you. So if you're a person who seems to bring out a lot of anger out of your partner, they can probably help untangle what that mystery is about, and therefore help you become compassionate, not only for yourself, but for the sake of your relationship and your partner. And then it teaches them the same thing. And then you two can be on the same team. And I think that's a wonderful thing to also learn. And that applies to your children, other relatives, even coworkers. You know, if you guys are having problems, there's no limit to where you can go with this. But I think the whole idea is that there's a way of solving problems that can be more helpful than destructive. I'm John Johnson. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast, and I want to thank you for listening.